The cold metal floor sent shivers through Marcus Cole's bare feet as two armored guards dragged him into the massive courtroom. He had been in this orbital station for 3 weeks now, waiting for his trial, and every day felt like a year in this sterile prison floating above a green and deadly world. The courtroom was unlike anything on Earth. Thousands of seats rose up in a spiral pattern, filled with creatures Marcus had never seen before in his 32 years of life. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had shells or exoskeletons that clicked when they moved. But the beings that scared him the most sat at the judge's platform. High above the Kethvalthi were tall, taller than any human, with bodies like giant insects standing upright. Their eyes were compound, made of hundreds of tiny lenses that reflected light in disturbing ways. Their arms ended in sharp pincers, and when they spoke, their mandibles clicked together in patterns that a translator device turned into words Marcus could understand. Overseer Thrin was the largest of them, set in the center of the platform, his dark carapace gleaming under the harsh white lights when he looked down at Marcus. There was no emotion in those multifaceted eyes, just cold, distant curiosity. Like a scientist looking at a bug under a microscope. Human designation Marcus Cole. Thrin's translated voice echoed through the chamber. You stand before this tribunal accused of crimes against protected wildlife on the sanctuary world of Beth-Ak 7. Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that his ship had crashed, that he had no choice, that he would have died if he had not hunted those creatures for food, but he had already tried explaining this 100 times. Nobody listened, nobody cared to these aliens. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community. They were seen as primitive, weak, and disposable, a junior species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel. 50 years ago, what did the death of one human matter compared to the extinction of protected alien wildlife? The evidence is clear, Thrin continued, his pincers clicking with each pause. 17 classa protected organisms were killed by your hands over a period of 40 days while you awaited rescue on Beth-Ak 7. I was surviving, Marcus finally said, his voice hoarse from weeks of silence. My ship crashed and I had no food. A ripple of clicking laughter spread through the Kethval judges. Surviving. Thrin repeated the word like it was a joke. Yes, we have heard this defense from your legal representative. But the law is the law, and ignorance is not an excuse. He leaned forward, and Marcus could see his own reflection in those horrible compound eyes. Your species is new to the galaxy, human, and you have much to learn about respecting the natural order. So we will teach you. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The sentence for your crimes is 1 standard galactic year on the surface of Varith 9. The courtroom erupted in sounds. Marcus could not identify. Some species gasped, others clicked or whistled, and a few made noises that sounded almost like crying even. The guards holding Marcus seemed to flinch. Varith 9 is a rehabilitation world, Thrin explained, though his tone made it clear this was no rehabilitation at all. Offenders are placed on the surface with no equipment, no supplies, and no assistance, and they must live off the land until their sentence is complete. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The average survival time for non-native species on Varith 9 is 11 days. 11 days. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The planet's ecosystem is among the most hostile in charted space. Thrin continued, almost sounding pleased. Acidic rainfall occurs every 3 days. 90% of plant life is toxic to carbon-based organisms, and the predator population is both abundant and aggressive. Another Kethval judge leaned forward and spoke. Overseer, is it wise to waste resources on this sentence when the human will clearly not survive even a fraction of the term? Thrin made a sound that might have been a chuckle. That is precisely the point. Adjudicator, the human killed protected wildlife to survive on Beth-Ak 7. So let us see how well this soft species survives on a world that does not forgive weakness. He looked back down at Marcus. Consider this a lesson. Human, not just for you, but for your entire species watching from their little blue world. Marcus tried to find words. Tried to think of something to say, but his mind was blank. This was not justice. This was an execution dressed up in legal language. The sentence will begin immediately, Thrin declared. Remove him. The guards dragged Marcus out of the courtroom before he could even process what had happened. They took him through long white corridors filled with alien script he could not read. They stripped him of his prison clothes and gave him only a simple pair of pants and a thin shirt made of some rough alien fabric. No shoes, no tools, no food, no water, nothing. You are being given more than most, one of the guards said, his translator making his clicking speech sound almost sympathetic. Some species are sent down with nothing at all. How generous, Marcus muttered. They brought him to a small shuttle bay where a single drop pod waited. It was barely large enough for one person, with no windows and no controls, just a seat, straps, and a door that would open when it hit the ground. The surveillance drone will follow you, the guard explained. It will record your time on the surface for the rehabilitation archives. And when your sentence ends, a retrieval team will come for you. Marcus almost laughed at that. When his sentence ends, as if anyone expected him to last a year, as if anyone expected him to last 2 weeks, he climbed into the pod and let them strap him in. The last thing he saw before the door sealed shut was Overseer Thrin, watching from a viewing window above, those compound eyes gleaming with what Marcus could only describe as anticipation. Then the pod launched. To fall through the atmosphere was violent. Pod shook and rattled, and Marcus felt heat building around him as the craft punched through layers of cloud and toxic air. He thought about his life back on Earth. He had been a survival instructor for 15 years, teaching people how to live in the wilderness with nothing but their wits and their hands. He had survived deserts, jungles, frozen tundras, and everything in between, but this was different. This was an alien world designed to kill him in ways he could not even imagine. The pod slammed into something soft, and Marcus was thrown against his straps, hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. For a long moment, he just sat there, gasping, waiting for his heart to stop racing. Then the door blew open. Hot, wet air rushed in, carrying smells Marcus had never encountered before. He unstrapped himself and stepped out into the jungle of Vareth 9. The trees were massive, rising hundreds of feet into a sky that glowed. A sickly yellow-green vines hung everywhere like living curtains, some of them pulsing with bioluminescent light. The ground was soft and spongy, covered in moss that squelched under his bare feet, and the sounds. The jungle was alive with sounds. Clicks, howls, screams, and things Marcus could not even begin to identify. Something flew past his head, and he ducked instinctively. His heart pounding. A small drone hovered into view, its camera lens focusing on his Fastherans watching. Marcus thought, they are all watching. They expected him to panic. They expected him to run. They expected him to die screaming in this green hell within days. Marcus took a deep breath of the thick, humid air. Then he sat down on the fallen log and did nothing. He watched. He listened. His jungle stretched out before him, full of death and danger, but also full of information pattern secrets. He was not going to give them the satisfaction of watching him die. Not today, not in 11 days, not ever. Marcus Cole was a survivor, and this alien jungle was about to learn what that meant. High above the deadly jungle of Vareth 9, in the cold comfort of the orbital station, Overseer Thrin sat before a wall of holographic screens. Each screen showed a different angle of the human prisoner, captured by the surveillance drone that followed him everywhere. Thrin had watched hundreds of prisoners over his long career. He knew exactly how this would go. First came the panic. Then came the desperate running. Then came the mistakes. And finally came death. It always happened the same way. And it usually happened fast, but this human was doing something Thryn had never seen before. He was doing nothing. For 3 full hours after landing, Marcus Cole simply sat on a log and watched the jungle around him. He did not move. He did not search for food or water. He did not try to build shelter. He just sat there, his eyes moving slowly from one thing to another, like he was reading a book that only he could see. "What is he doing?" asked Warden Crix, a younger Cathval who had been assigned to monitor the human's progress. "I do not know," Thryn admitted, and he did not like admitting that at all on day 2. The human finally moved, but instead of running or searching randomly like most prisoners, he walked slowly through the jungle, stopping every few steps to examine plants, insects, and the ground beneath his feet. He picked up a handful of soil and smelled eyes, touched the bark of trees, and studied the creatures that crawled on them, found a small stream and watched it for nearly an hour without drinking from it. The water is not toxic to his species, Crix noted, checking the environmental data. "Why does he not drink?" "Perhaps he is stupid," Thryn suggested. But even as he said it, he did not believe it on day 3. The acidic rains came. This was usually when prisoners died. The rain on Vareth 9 was not like rain on other worlds. It burned exposed skin and could blind a creature in minutes if they did not find cover. Most prisoners learned about the rain too late, but the human had already built a shelter. Thryn leaned forward in his chair, his compound eyes focusing on the screen with new intensity. The shelter was crude, just a frame of branches covered with broad purple leaves. But the human had crawled inside it before the first drops fell. How did he know? Crix asked. Thryn said nothing, but he pulled up the footage from the previous day and watched it again. There it was. The human had spent nearly 2 hours watching a group of native birds, small flying creatures that nested in the upper canopy. He had watched them gather those same purple leaves and arrange them over their nests. He had copied them. He learned from the wildlife, Thryn said slowly. And something cold moved through his thorax on day 7. The human made fire. This should have been impossible. There were no natural sources of ignition on Vareth 9, and no species on the planet had ever developed fire-making technology, but the human had found volcanic glass near a rocky outcrop and had spent 2 days carefully shaping it into tools. Then he had found dry moss in a cave and had rubbed 2 sticks together with patient, endless determination until smoke appeared. Thryn watched the footage 3 times. He had never seen anything like it. The human sat by his small fire that night, cooking strips of meat from a creature he had trapped using a simple snare made from plant fibers. He was eating. He was warm. He was alive. And he was smiling. "This is unusual," Crix said. "This is impossible." Thryn corrected him by day 15. The human had established a proper camp. He had chosen a spot on elevated ground near the stream he had watched so carefully. In those first days, his shelter had grown from a simple lean-to into something more permanent, with walls made from woven branches and a roof that channeled the acidic rain away from his living space. He had dug a small pit lined with stones where he kept his fire burning constantly. He had created tools, knives from volcanic glass, a spear with a sharpened bone tip, containers made from hollowed gourds he had found growing on vines near the water. Where did he learn to do these things? Crix asked one morning as they watched the human weave a fishing net from plant fibers. Thryn had done research on humans after the first week. What he found disturbed him. They evolved on a world with extreme environmental variation. He explained. Deserts, frozen wastelands, jungles, mountains, and oceans, and they survived in all of them without natural weapons, without armor, without venom or claws. How? Crix asked. They adapted, Thryn said. They learned, they built, they changed their environment instead of changing themselves. On day 22, the human did something that made Thryn request additional surveillance drones. There was a tuber plant that grew near the stream, a thick root vegetable that every database in the Kethful archive listed as highly toxic to carbon-based life. The human dug up several of these tubers and brought them back to his camp. He is going to poison himself, Crick said with something like relief. Finally, but the human did not eat the tubers instead. He boiled them in water using a container he had made from clay and hardened in his fire. He drained the water and boiled them again, and again. He repeated this process for 3 days straight. Boiling and draining, until the water no longer turned brown. Then he ate a small piece and waited. He did not die. He did not even get sick. That is not possible, Crix whispered. The toxins in that plant are water-soluble, Thryn interrupted, his voice flat. The toxins are water-soluble, and he figured that out somehow. But how could he know? Thryn did not answer because he did not have an answer. No species in the Galactic database had ever processed those tubers into edible food. The human had done it in 3 days through nothing but observation and experimentation. By day 30, Marcus Cole had transformed his little patch of jungle. He had a garden now, a small cleared area where he had transplanted edible plants. He had identified through careful testing. He had smoking racks where he preserved meat for days when hunting was poor. He had collected rainwater in clay pots sealed with plant resin, giving him clean drinking water that did not need to be boiled. He had weapons, tools, shelter, food, and fire. He had everything he needed to survive, and worst of all, in Thryn's opinion, he seemed to be enjoying himself on the night of day 30. The surveillance drone captured something that made Thryn's ichor run cold. The human was sitting by his fire, eating a meal of roasted meat and boiled tubers. And he was laughing, actually laughing, not the desperate laughter of madness that Thryn had seen in other prisoners, but genuine amusement at something only he understood. He was talking to himself, or perhaps to the jungle, saying words the translator could not quite pick up, but he was happy. Thryn closed the observation program and sat in darkness for a long time. The human should be dead. Every calculation, every prediction, every piece of data said the human should be dead. But Marcus Cole was not dead. He was thriving, and for the first time in his long career, Overseer Thryn felt something he had never felt while watching a prisoner before. He felt afraid. He opened a new file in the system and marked it with the highest priority rating, Human Behavioral Analysis. He typed, "Continued observation required." Then he leaned back and watched the screens again, his compound eyes reflecting the image of a small fire burning in an alien jungle, and the strange soft creature who had built it against all odds. 4 months had passed since Marcus Cole fell from the sky and landed in the green hell of Varath 9, in the orbital station above. A small team of wardens had been assigned to watch him around the clock, and what they witnessed had become the most discussed topic in the entire Galactic Corrections Authority. The human was not just surviving anymore, he was building a kingdom. Marcus had expanded his camp into something that could only be called a settlement. His original shelter had grown into a proper structure with multiple rooms, each serving a different purpose. One room was for sleeping, lined with soft dried moss and animal furs. One room was for food storage, filled with smoked meats, dried fruits, and containers of processed tubers. One room was for tools, where he kept his growing collection of knives, spears, axes, and other implements he had crafted from bone, stone, and wood. He had built a second structure nearby that served as a workshop. Here he experimented with new ideas, testing different materials, creating new tools, and solving problems that no algorithm had predicted he would even encounter. Let alone overcome his garden had tripled in size. He had identified 17 different plant species that were safe to eat after proper processing, and he cultivated them in neat rows that he watered every morning from the stream. He had built a simple irrigation system using hollowed-out logs that channeled water from the stream directly to his crops. No species on Vareth 9 had ever farmed. No prisoner had ever even attempted it. But Marcus Cole had looked at the jungle and seen not a death sentence, but a challenge. And he had risen to meet that challenge in ways that left the warden speechless. He has created antibiotics, Warden Crix reported one morning. His voice trembling slightly. Overseer Thrin looked up from his console with sharp attention. Explain. Crix pulled up the surveillance footage from the previous week. It showed Marcus cutting his hand on a sharp rock while working in his garden. The wound was deep, and on any other world with any other species, it would have become infected within days. But Marcus had done something unexpected. Had collected mold from rotting fruit in the jungle. The same kind of mold that most creatures avoided because of its bitter smell. He had mixed this mold with water and applied it to his wound. The infection cleared within 3 days. Crick said, "Our medical database confirms that the mold produces natural antibiotic compounds, but no species on record has ever used it this way." Thrin said nothing. There was nothing to say. Human continued to do impossible things, and the wardens could only watch and document. But the most astonishing development came in the middle of month 4. It started with a shadow at the edge of Marcus's camp. The surveillance drone detected it first. A young Vreth, one of the apex predators of Vareth 9, lurking in the undergrowth about 50 meters from the human settlement. The Vreth were terrifying creatures. They stood as tall as a human at the shoulder, with 6 powerful legs, a body covered in scales that could deflect most attacks, and a jaw filled with teeth designed for crushing bone. They were solitary hunters, fiercely territorial, and they had killed more prisoners on Vareth 9 than any other species. Wardens expected Marcus to run or to arm himself for battle instead. He did something that made Thrin question his own sanity. He walked toward the Vreth. "What is he doing?" Crick shouted, reaching for the emergency beacon that could summon a retrieval team. "He's going to die." "Wait," Thrin commanded. Though his own instincts screamed at him to intervene, Marcus stopped about 20 meters from the creature and crouched down. Making himself smaller and less threatening, he was holding something in his hand. A strip of smoked meat from his storage room. The Vreth watched him with predator eyes. Its muscles tensed to spring for a long moment. Nothing happened. Then Marcus tossed the meat toward the creature and backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact, never showing fear. The Vreth sniffed the meat, looked at Marcus, and then ate it the next day. The Vreth returned Marcus, gave it more meat. This continued for 2 weeks, every day. The Vreth came a little closer, every day. Marcus stayed a little longer, talking to the creature in soft tones, letting it grow accustomed to his presence. By the end of the 2nd week, the Vreth was eating from his hand. "This is not possible." Crick's whispered Thrin had already requested a full xenobiology review. The Vreth were not social creatures. They did not form bonds. They did not coexist with other species. Every study, every observation, every piece of data collected over centuries of research said that what Marcus was doing could not be done. But the footage did not lie. By month 5. The Vreth was living near Marcus's camp. It slept in a clearing about 30 meters away, and it followed Marcus when he went hunting. Watching him with those intelligent predator eyes, Marcus had named it something the translator could not properly interpret, but it sounded like shadow. Other wardens from across the station came to watch the footage. They could not believe what they were seeing. A human, a soft creature from a temperate world with no natural weapons, had somehow befriended the most dangerous predator on one of the most hostile planets in charted space. How? Was the question everyone asked. Thryn thought he understood, but he could not explain it in terms that made sense to his species. The human had shown patience. He had shown consistency, had offered food without demanding anything in return, and somehow, over time, the predator had begun to see him not as prey, but as something else, a companion, maybe even a leader. By month 6, there was a second breath. By month 7, there was a third. They moved together now, Marcus and his pack of alien predators, hunting through the jungle in silent coordination. The Vreth would flush prey toward Marcus, and he would strike with his spear, or Marcus would set traps, and the Vreth would drive animals into them. They had become a team, a unit, something that had never existed on Vareth 9 before. Marcus had done more than survive. He had created a new kind of ecosystem with himself at the center. "We need to report this to the High Council," Crick said one evening. Thryn agreed, though the thought filled him with a strange mix of emotions. He had watched hundreds of prisoners die on Vareth 9. He had felt nothing for any of them, but this human had made him feel something he could not name. Was it respect? Was it fear? Was it wonder? He did not know, but as he watched Marcus Cole walking through the jungle at sunset, 3 apex predators padding silently at his side, Thryn knew one thing for certain: the soft species from the Little Blue world was not soft at all, and the galaxy was going to have to come to terms with what that meant. He opened a secure channel to the Kethful High Council and began composing his report. Subject: has exceeded all survival projections, he typed. Human demonstrates unprecedented adaptive capabilities. Recommend immediate priority reassessment of species classification. He paused, looking at the screens one more time. Marcus was sitting by his fire, one hand resting on the head of the nearest Vreth, scratching it behind what might have been ears. The creature's eyes were half closed with contentment. Also recommend, Thryn added, accelerated timeline review for sentence termination. He did not say why. He did not need to. Anyone who watched the footage would understand. Human had won, and the longer he stayed on Vareth 9, the more the wardens would have to question everything they thought they knew about the natural order of the galaxy. The great chamber of the Kethful High Council had not been this full in decades. Representatives from 12 different species filled the observer galleries, their translators humming softly as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Word had spread across the sector about the human on Vareth 9, and now everyone wanted answers. Overseer Thryn stood at the center of the chamber floor, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his long career. Above him, the 7 members of the High Council sat in their elevated seats, their compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the holographic displays that showed footage from the jungle world. Below 8 months, the human had survived 8 months on a planet designed to kill him in 11 days. Overseer Thryn, the chief counselor's voice boomed through the chamber. You were responsible for this prisoner's rehabilitation. So explain to this council how a soft species from a Class 3 temperate world has not only survived on Vareth 9, but has apparently conquered it. Thryn felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. Honored council, he began, his mandibles clicking nervously. I do not have a complete explanation. Murmurs rippled through the galleries. The human subject, designated Marcus Cole, has demonstrated capabilities that our databases did not predict and that our models cannot explain. He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show an aerial view of Marcus's compound. As you can see, the subject has constructed a permanent settlement with multiple structures, agricultural systems, water collection and purification, and food preservation facilities. The display shifted again, showing Marcus walking through the jungle with his 3 Vreth companions. He has also domesticated apex predators, something no species in our records has ever accomplished on Vareth 9. The chief counselor leaned forward, her ancient carapace creaking with the movement. Domesticated? She repeated. You are telling this council that a human has tamed Vreth? Yes, honored chief. The same Vreth that killed 47 prisoners last cycle alone? Yes, honored chief. Silence fell over the chamber finally. A younger council member spoke up. This is clearly some kind of error in the surveillance systems. As no soft species could possibly. The surveillance systems have been checked 17 times. Thrin interrupted. Something he never would have dared to do before this assignment. I have personally verified every recording, and I assure the council that what you are seeing is real. More murmurs from the galleries. The chief counselor raised one clawed hand for silence. We have heard your report, Overseer, but we still do not have an explanation for how this is possible. And without an explanation, we cannot make informed decisions about this matter. If I may, honored council. All eyes turned to a small figure standing at the edge of the chamber floor. She was a young Kethfol, barely into adulthood. Wearing the simple uniform of a junior analysterin, recognized her as one of the researchers who had been assigned to his observation team 3 months ago. And who are you? The chief counselor demanded. Analyst Ven, honored chief. I've been studying the human subject for the past 90 days. And I believe I can offer an explanation. The council exchanged glances. Speak then, analyst. Ven stepped forward. Her movements precise and confident. Despite her youth, she activated her own holographic display, which showed a rotating image of a human body. The mistake we made, she began, was classifying humans as a soft species. And this classification led us to assume they were weak. But the data shows something very different. She highlighted the human's legs. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, which means they did not catch prey by being faster or stronger, but by being more enduring, as they would chase animals for hours, sometimes entire days, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. The display shifted to show the human skin. Their bodies regulate temperature through a process called sweating, which allows them to remain active in conditions that would cause most species to overheat. And this adaptation is extremely rare in the galaxy. She highlighted the human's digestive system. They can process an incredibly wide range of organic matter for nutrition, including plants, animals, fungi, and combinations that would poison most carbon-based life forms. And this is why the subject was able to detoxify the tubers on Vareth 9. The display changed again, showing the human's brain. But most importantly, Ven continued, her voice growing stronger. Humans possess an extraordinary capacity for problem-solving and adaptation, as their brains are wired not to accept their environment but to change it. She looked up at the council. Every other species in our database has evolved specialized traits for their home world, such as armor for defense, venom for attack, speed for escape, and so on. But humans evolved almost no specialized traits at all. She paused, letting this sink in. This is not a weakness, honored council, but rather their greatest strength. Because being unspecialized means they can specialize in anything. The chamber was completely silent. The subject did not survive Vareth 9 because he was lucky, Ven concluded. He survived because he observed, he learned, he adapted, and he built. And he will continue to do so as long as we leave him there. She looked directly at the chief counselor. In my professional opinion, the longer we leave this human on the planet, the more dangerous he will become. Not because he is violent, but because he is capable. And there is no telling what he will accomplish if given more time. The chief counselor sat back in her seat, her compound eyes unreadable. What are you suggesting, analyst? Ven glanced at Thrin, who gave her a small nod. I am suggesting that we terminate the subject's sentence immediately and remove him from Vareth 9. An uproar erupted in the gallery's representatives shouted objections in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep up. Order! The chief counselor commanded, and slowly the chamber fell quiet again. You are suggesting that we release a convicted criminal early because he survived his punishment? I am suggesting, Venn replied carefully, that the original sentence was based on flawed assumptions about human capabilities, and that continuing the sentence serves no rehabilitative purpose, because the subject has already demonstrated that Vareth 9 cannot break him. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed Marcus teaching one of the Vreth to respond to hand signals. Every day he remains on that planet, he grew stronger and more established. And if the Council's goal was to punish him through suffering, that goal has failed, because this human is not suffering. The chief counselor looked at her fellow council members. They communicated silently through subtle movements of their antennae, a private language that even Thryn could not fully interpret. Finally, the chief counselor turned back to face the chamber. This council will take the analyst's recommendation under advisement. But we have one final question. She looked at Thryn. What do you believe will happen if we leave the human on Vareth 9 for the remainder of his sentence? Thryn thought about everything he had witnessed over the past 8 months. He thought about the fire that should have been impossible. He thought about the food processing techniques that no algorithm had predicted. He thought about the predators that now followed. A human like loyal guardians, honored chief, he said slowly. I believe that if we leave him there for 4 more months, we will return to find that he has built a civilization. He paused, and I am not certain we want to find out what comes after that. The chief counselor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Then it is decided, she announced. The sentence is terminated effective immediately, and a retrieval team will be dispatched to collect the prisoner. She looked down at Thryn. You will lead the retrieval team personally. Overseer. Thryn bowed his head. Yes, honored chief. An overseer? He looked up. To try not to get killed by his pets. For the first time in his career, Thryn was not sure if that was a joke. The retrieval shuttle descended through the yellow-green clouds of Vareth 9. Its engines humming with barely contained power inside the cockpit. Overseer Thryn watched the jungle canopy approach and felt something he had never experienced before: a prisoner retrieval. He felt nervous. Weapons ready. He ordered his 6-guard security team. We do not know how the subject will react to our arrival. The guards checked their pulse rifles and formed up near the exit ramp through the viewport. Thryn could see the clearing where the human's compound stood, and even from this altitude, the sight made his thorax tighten. It was bigger than the surveillance footage had shown. Much bigger. Marcus had continued building in the days since the council's decision, adding new structures, expanding his walls, creating what looked almost like a small village designed for 1 inhabitant and 3 very large predators. The shuttle touched down at the edge of the clearing, its landing gear sinking slightly into the soft jungle floor. Thryn activated the external speakers. Human Marcus Cole. His translated voice echoed across the compound. By order of the Galactic Corrections Authority, your sentence has been terminated, and you are to be retrieved immediately. So please approach the shuttle with your hands visible. Silence. The guards shifted nervously, their weapons raised. Then the gate of the compound swung open, and Marcus Cole walked out. Thryn barely recognized him. The soft, pale creature who had been dropped into this jungle 8 months ago was gone. In his place stood something harder, leaner, and infinitely more dangerous. Marcus wore armor made from breath scales, fitted perfectly to his body, and gleaming with an oily sheen. He carried a spear in one hand, its tip made from volcanic glass that had been shaped with obvious skill. His skin had darkened from exposure to the alien sun, and his muscles moved beneath it like cables under tension. But his eyes were what struck Thryn the most. They were calm, confident, the eyes of a predator who knew exactly where he stood in the food chain behind Marcus. 3 Vreth emerged from the compound, their 6-legged bodies moving with fluid grace. They flanked him like guards, their intelligent eyes fixed on the shuttle and the armed Kethful standing at its ramp. "Took you long enough," Marcus said. His voice carrying clearly across the clearing. Thryn descended the ramp slowly, his guards spreading out behind him with weapons raised. "The council has reviewed your case," he said, trying to maintain his official tone. "They have determined that your sentence has achieved its rehabilitative purpose and—" "Rehabilitative purpose?" Marcus interrupted, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Is that what we are calling it?" He walked forward, and Thryn noticed that the Vreth moved with him, their massive bodies flanking him on either side, the guards tensed, their weapons tracking the predators. "Tell your guards to lower their weapons," Marcus said. "Shadow does not like guns pointed at her." Thryn hesitated, then gestured for his guards to stand down. "You name them," he said. "They have names," Marcus replied. "They are not just animals, Overseer." "And neither am I." He stopped about 5 meters from Thryn, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough to react if anything went wrong. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "Do you put me back in a cell somewhere?" "That is." Undecided, Thryn admitted. "The council wishes to speak with you? I thought they might." Marcus looked back at his compound, at the structures he had built with his own hands, at the garden that had fed him, at the walls that had protected him. "I have conditions," he said. Thryn's mandibles clicked in surprise. "Conditions?" "3 of them, and they are not negotiable." He held up one finger. "First, my Vreth are not to be harmed, and they will be relocated to a sanctuary where they can live without being hunted or used for experiments." He held up a second finger. "Second, this compound is to be left intact, as it will serve as proof of what I accomplished here, and maybe someday it will help another prisoner survive." He held up a third finger. "Third, I want a full pardon and a position with the Galactic Corrections Authority." Thryn stared at him. "You want to work for us?" "I want to work with you," Marcus corrected. "You have databases full of so-called impossible worlds, planets where you send prisoners to die. But I think you have been looking at those worlds wrong." He gestured at the jungle around them. "This place was not my punishment, Overseer. It was my classroom. And I learned things here that none of your species have ever learned." He met Thryn's compound eyes directly. "Let me teach those things to others. And let me help you understand what the right species can do with the right mindset." Thryn was silent for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why would you want to help the civilization that tried to kill you?" Marcus smiled, and this time it was genuine, "Because I'm not angry, Overseer, and I understand why you did what you did. Because you were afraid of something you did not understand." He looked up at the yellow-green sky. "Humans have been afraid of things we did not understand since we first crawled out of the caves. But we learned that the best way to stop being afraid is to learn. And that is what I want to offer." He looked back at Thryn. "Knowledge instead of fear." Thryn considered everything he had witnessed over the past 8 months. He thought about the fire and the farming. He thought about the processed food and the domesticated predators. He thought about the reports he had written and the council meetings he had attended, and he thought about what Analyst Ven had said about humans being unspecialized, able to become specialists in anything. "I cannot promise anything," Thryn said finally, "but I will present your conditions to the council. That is all I ask." Marcus turned and said something in a soft voice to the Vreth. They made low rumbling sounds in response, almost like purring, and then they walked back toward the compound. "They will wait here until I know where they are going," Marcus explained. "And they understand." Thryn did not ask how a human had learned to communicate with creatures that had never formed bonds with any species in galactic history. He was not sure he wanted to know 1 year later. Marcus Cole stood in a classroom at the Galactic Corrections Academy, the most prestigious training facility for wardens in 3 sectors. 40 cadets sat before him, representing 20 different species. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had shells or exoskeletons that clicked when they moved, just like the courtroom where Marcus had been sentenced. But this time, he was not the prisoner. He was the teacher behind him. A holographic display showed images of Varth 9, the jungle, his compound, his garden, his fire, his wrath. "The jungle did not break me," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Because I did not fight it, because I listened to it. And that is lesson 1. He clicked the button, and the display changed to show a diagram of survival priorities. Every environment has rules, and if you learn those rules, you can survive anywhere. But if you try to impose your own rules without understanding the environment first, you will die." In the front row, a young Kethvol took notes furiously. She looked up and met Marcus's eyes, and he gave her a small nod. Analyst Ven had been promoted after her presentation to the council now. She was his teaching assistant over the next 6 months. Marcus continued, "I am going to teach you how to think like a survivor, how to observe before you act, how to adapt instead of resist, and how to turn any environment from an enemy into an ally." He looked out the window. Where a ship was docked at the station, it was a research vessel, equipped for extended planetary surveys. Its destination was a world that the Corrections Authority had classified as unsurvivable. Mars had volunteered to prove them wrong. "The galaxy is full of places that look impossible," he said, turning back to his students. "But impossible is just another word for unexplored." He smiled, "And humans are very good at exploring." Outside the window, the stars gleamed with countless worlds waiting to be understood, and somewhere in those stars, on a jungle planet that had been meant to kill him, 3 Vreth roamed free in a protected sanctuary, living proof of what one human could accomplish when the universe tried to break. And Marcus Cole had not just survived Varth 9, he had transformed it, and himself, and the way an entire civilization thought about what was possible, and he was just getting started.